Let's talk about the Jets. They just fired their GM today, Joe Douglas, after 6 seasons with the franchise. This comes after, again, 6 years, a record well below 500. The Jets had sky-high expectations coming into this season with a healthy Aaron Rodgers, with some of the talent like a Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, others coming into the season, and the season has been nothing short of an abject disaster. Not like I called it from the jump. I'm not going to pat myself on the back. I'm the host, not a contestant on this show, but the Jets right now sitting here at 3-8 with a minimal chance to make the playoffs. I'll start with you, Paris. Was firing Joe Douglas the right move for the New York Jets?
So on one hand, you have to kind of say yes, because he hasn't had a singular winning season since he's been on that team. But when I look at GMs, I really look at them like what players they bring in. They can't control how the players perform. They can really control on their staff and the players they bring in. And when you look at the team he's tried to build, you really can't say he's done wrong moves. Like when he took over the team 2019, 2020. In 2020, their leading rusher was Frank Gore. What are you supposed to do with that team? There's nothing on that team for him to do. Then you go into the next year, you get Zach Wilson, you get Michael Carter, and they get CJ Mosley. That's a big piece right there. He's been the biggest piece on the defense until maybe Sauce Gardner, and at this point, probably still the biggest piece on the defense. So you bring in good players that year. Then the next year, you bring in Breece Hall, you bring in Garrett Wilson, you bring in Sauce Gardner. Then you bring in Aaron Rodgers, which is kind of, you can question it because he was aging. You could tell he was getting older. You could tell he was on the decline. But this was a guy with Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson loved Aaron Rodgers. The plan obviously was to be trading there. Did it work? It didn't work at all. But you can see the vision. You can't look at that play and say, nobody else made that move. You can see exactly what he was trying to do there. It just hasn't worked. Everything he tried to bring in, he brought everything for Aaron Rodgers. Devontae Adams, Randall Cobb, Alan Lazard. Everything that was successful for Aaron Rodgers, it just didn't work. So on one hand, you have to fire him because he doesn't have a winning season. But I really don't think he's a bad GM. The moves he made weren't bad moves. Just in the end, it just didn't work.
If you want to pinpoint one great move he made, the fact that he got 2 first-round picks for Jamal Adams was probably the best move that he made in his entire tenure with the Jets. And like you said, he did accumulate the talent. You talk about the Williams brothers, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, among others. Like, again, it is the coaching staff's job, and frankly, it's the players' job to be able to perform on a consistent basis every Sunday. So you make a fair point, and the fact that they did fire him in season as opposed to waiting until the end was strange, to say the least. I'm wondering what led to that decision from the upper management, or maybe from a particular quarterback. Who knows? To you, Alfred Parsard Jr., you are the Jets fan in here, my man, so I want to know what you think. Was it the right move for the Jets to fire Joe Douglas today?
Absolutely right call. And as we all know that sports is a results-driven business. It doesn't matter that you put the best team together on paper. It matters, do you make the playoffs? Do you go far in the playoffs when you make the playoffs? The guy hasn't had a winning season, and even more telling, the Jets have the longest NFL playoff drought. They hired Joe Douglas with the expectation that we are going to break this drought. We do not want this record. This is an embarrassing record. This is a record we do not want to have. Like, we're the laughing stock of the entire NFL right now, minus maybe the New York Giants, which are only a game less than us. The good that he did, I give Joe Douglas credit. That 2022 draft class that he drafted, masterful, with Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, and Sauce Gardner, where you had the offensive and defensive rookie of the year on the same team. I don't remember the last time that's been done. I don't think that that'll be done for a long time. But on the flip side, it hasn't translated to success. Zach Wilson should have been gone way before he was actually shipped to Denver. You get Aaron Rodgers, who, again, we all know he was on the decline. This is not the same Rodgers that last won the MVP in 2020. I don't know what type of expectation they had with him being a 40-year-old quarterback coming off of a torn Achilles. They didn't draft a quarterback this draft class, which you should have done, because a 40-year-old quarterback who just blew out his Achilles, you have to prepare for the future. Now you have to go into this draft and prepare for that same future when you could have had a quarterback come in this year, obviously not play, sit behind Rodgers and learn, because Rodgers is a good guy to learn from. But again, he's been here since 2019, not one single winning season. I could even understand if you want to give him a long leash, had the team finished 8-8, 9-7, or even with the extra game. But right call. I mean, again, sports is a results-driven business, and the results simply were not there. Got to change the culture, and it all starts with the front office.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that, there was no. I remember the first sort of sign, at least for me as an outsider looking in at the New York Jets and their upper management, is when Aaron Rodgers goes down, the fact that they were banking on the fact, hey, Aaron stays healthy, by the way, with a terrible O-line, which the Jets were last season over the course of the year. We're going to bank on the fact that Zach Wilson's going to be ready, just, I guess, by osmosis, being around Aaron Rodgers will get better, as opposed to having a good, solid backup quarterback in place of him to stabilize the ship, and they just didn't have that. And so, listen, there's been a collection of missteps from pretty much everybody involved, but Joe Douglas certainly is one of those at the top of that list. So I think you make some really good points, Alfred. To you, Tyler, did the Jets make the right move today and fire their GM, Joe Douglas?
Absolutely. It's the last move of the total blow-up. I mean, he was 30-63 in his whole tenure for the Jets, and he had one job, and that was to bring in a quarterback. He drafted Zach Wilson. You heard stories as soon as Zach Wilson was drafted about how his girlfriend came out, said he was dating an older chick. Anyway, he was just not focused from the beginning, and that was a terrible pick, in my opinion. And then you have Aaron Rodgers. He was never able to get a quarterback here that was sufficient. He did draft those good players that you mentioned, but the fact that he was never able to bring in a good QB and have any sort of success, he just fired Robert Saleh, not too long ago, and this has just been an awful 3 to 4 years for the Jets. He had to go, and I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner.
Yeah, and that's, I think the only reason it didn't happen sooner was the fact that Aaron blew his Achilles last year, and so guys like Saleh, guys like Joe Douglas, it's like, okay, we'll give you a mulligan. We didn't get a chance to see how this played out, but at the same time, like you said, and going back sort of what Alfred was saying, results-driven business, and it just never panned out. Finally, to you, Mike Guido, did the Jets make the right move in firing Joe Douglas as the GM today?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think Joe Douglas got his reputation from Philadelphia, obviously. We all kind of expected him to be this great drafter, this great builder of teams. And when he came into the Jets, I mean, he's had a couple of hits, but I think the number is, if I'm not mistaken, I think I saw this number. Joe Douglas, in the history of the NFL, Joe Douglas has the worst percentage of draft picks that are remaining in the NFL from the time they were a GM. It is remarkable how terrible they've drafted in late rounds. So as far as that's concerned, I think it's absolutely the right call. But I also think this, as far as this is concerned, this is the guy that's supposed to be like an offensive line sort of guru, and they've pretty much whiffed on everybody they've brought in except for Elijah Vera Tucker. And at that point, you're just kind of thinking to yourself, what is this guy actually good at when he comes in as a GM? I just don't know that there's anything worth keeping here. And to be honest with you, since he's given everything to Aaron Rodgers, I mean, you're kind of, asking yourself, okay, if we're going to try and separate ourselves from Aaron Rodgers, we need to kind of get rid of the things that Aaron Rodgers then kind of comes with. And I think Joe Douglas, being the guy that provided all of that stuff for him, they might just be like, you know what, I want to tear this whole thing down, get through this entire regime of what Rodgers is like. That report came out today. So I do think it was the right call. I'm actually surprised it wasn't sooner that they didn't do this. But yes, I think it was the right call to let Joe Douglas go.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the fact that he was as much, or at least proclaimed as much of an offensive line guy as he was. And boy, some of those Jets O-lines in his tenure were just some of the worst in the NFL. So I think he makes some good points across the board there. Paris Brown gets the most points and therefore jumps into the lead at 8 points, followed by Mike giving you 1 point. Alfred Purser Jr. gave you 3 points for the second best take. Tyler is still at 1 point. So we got a tight contest here in the 8 o'clock spot.